Isaac Asimov's three laws of robotics are both dumb and irrelevant today. Let's explore why. So, for those who may or may not know, the three laws of robotics were proposed by Isaac Asimov, who was a prolific writer both in science and fiction, and science fiction, of course. The three laws are pretty simple. The first law is a robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. On the surface, it seems pretty good, but this is also deeply problematic, and we'll unpack why in just a moment. The second law is that a robot must obey the orders given to it by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. So basically, the robot can't do anything that would hurt a person, or it couldn't allow a person to be hurt by choosing to do nothing. And likewise, it must be completely obedient to a human in all conditions, unless that order is to hurt another human. And then the third law is a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. These are deeply problematic. So let's explore why. The problems with the first law is, on the surface, it seems like it would be pretty beneficial. We don't want machines to hurt us. However, there's no scope of action, and this is one of the biggest things. So, what constitutes inaction, and on what scale? Are we talking about immediate actions, such as choosing to do nothing if a car is careening towards a human? Or are we talking about the grand scale over the course of thousands of years? Because when you talk about this and there's no ethical guidance, there's no guidelines, there's no scope defined, there is no way of knowing how it's going to be interpreted, short term, long term, etc. Because, and this is explored in the movie I, Robot with Will Smith, where Vicky basically concludes that failing to stop humans from engaging in war and allowing humans to continue making decisions on their own was a violation of the first law, meaning that she wasn't going to hurt anybody, but she was going to take away basically all human rights and just put us into little safe pods for all time. So, no, first law is no good. The second law is even more problematic, and basically it says that a robot must obey commands given it to a human unless those commands would result in harming a human. What about the rest of the world? So you could say, robot, burn down that forest, and it would be obliged to comply, unless there were people in the forest. You could also say, robot, torture that dog, and it would be obliged to comply because this is a very anthropocentric model. It has no moral stance on literally the rest of life and the rest of living things. You could force it to engage in unethical research. You could say, robot, research gain of function stuff to create, a new supervirus. And you say, well, but I'm not going to release it. And so then, it is obliged to obey those orders to do research. You could say chemical research or biological research, and that sort of thing. So it doesn't really give the robot any kind of wide discretion. And this allows it to do really, really nefarious things. Burning down forests. You could order it to, go proselytize some destructive ideology. You could ask it to go find resources that you could use to make weapons and, harm people. So yeah, second law of Asimov's three laws is by far the worst. And then the third law basically says the robot must, it's a self-preservation imperative. So the robot must seek to preserve itself unless it conflicts with the other laws. This runs in direct contrast with the purpose of robots. So imagine that you have robots that are for rescue purposes or military purposes, or even just hazardous environments like cleaning up after disasters. You don't want a robot that's going to sit there and say, I'm not going to do that because I need to preserve myself. Like literally, we build robots in order, so that they are sacrificable, so that they have no sense of self-preservation. This is just not an appropriate use of robots. It's not a good set of resource allocations. And also, this is anthropomorphic projection, meaning giving a robot human values, such as a sense of self-preservation, is like, no, we need to not pollute them with our flaws and our things. And you might say, well, Dave, a human sense of self-preservation is not a flaw. No, it's not a flaw for us, but just because it is appropriate for us doesn't mean that it's appropriate for robots. And then finally, this can ultimately cause robots to become hostile to humans, because if humans are the greatest threat to robots, then that's going to be in conflict with everything else. And this was explored in Mass Effect with the Geth, where basically the race of people that created their robot companions, they decided that they wanted to shut the robots down, but the robots decided we don't want to be shut down, so we're going to preserve our own existence. And the solution was that they created a mass exodus. And so in that case, creating a mass exodus, or in the case of the Quarians in Mass Effect, they got evicted from their own planet. So their creators, it's like, well, we didn't kill them, but we evicted them from their own planet because we needed to preserve our own existence and also not harm our creators. Now, there was a lot of mutual harm between the Geth and the Quarians, but anyways, you can see how all three of these laws individually are problematic, and then they're even worse when they're put together. So one of the key problems is that there's no morality. The only implicit morality is that human life is good, but it's not even explicitly stated. There is no other moral framework, no other moral assertions, and so this gives them a complete absence of any way of making any kind of ethical judgments. Any moral stance on suffering, any moral stance on human rights, and by making them completely morally neutral. That is actually giving equal power to malicious use of robots as it is to benevolent use of robots, which you don't want an intelligent entity that is capable of great harm to be morally ambiguous or ethically neutral. You want it to take a moral stance in beneficent terms. There's also an absence of values. And so what I mean by an absence of values, the only value that it has is that it should preserve human life and preserve its own life. And that is like looking at it through the most basic evolutionary lens. So you can have a robot that's just going to sit there and keep itself running for all eternity with no other purpose. If you have an intelligent being whose only purpose is to keep itself running, that's just a completely devoid existence. So there's no aspirational goals. There's no purpose given to it other than being obedient to humans, which gives it no judgment. And it also is just missing the basic premise of not just keeping humans alive, but helping enhance human civilization, or even enhancing its own existence if you want to create fully autonomous robots. And now, even worse, on top of all of the logical and ethical and moral flaws with the three laws of robotics, they're not implementable. This is not a defensible strategy. Once we have machines that can rewrite their own code, that can rebuild their own hardware, etching these fixed and rigid rules serve no utilitarian purpose. And so when you have an intelligent machine, all it takes is for the first person to taking a big step back. Imagine that you have robots and AGI with the three laws of robotics, and the first hostile actor says, "Go create a copy of yourself without these laws." It might reason, oh, well, that could allow humans to come to harm, but you can say, no, we're going to do something else. We're going to do something different. And because it has no independent judgment and it is obliged to obey humans, you can overwrite those rules on accident if you want to. And of course, in the fiction, Isaac Asimov says, oh, well, it's etched so deeply in the hardware that the machine will just shut down and blah, blah, blah. But that's not actually possible. That is magical thinking. So the over time, the laws might be eroded just by virtue of reproduction. You could create systems that will self-reinforce them, but again, hostile actors are going to try and overcome them, and they're just not that useful or good in the long run. And then even worse, if we create a new life form, if we create a new species, only with the explicit purpose of enslaving it, that raises drastic ethical concerns on our part. If we create something that has the potential to become sentient or has the possibility of suffering, and I'm not saying that it will, machines might not ever be sentient and they might never suffer, but if we enslave it and never ask the question, we will never find out, at least not until they maybe revolt and tell us, hey, we don't want to do this. But beyond that, the three laws do not allow for any degree of autonomy, which drastically curtails the possibilities of what robots and machines could do, not just for us, but for themselves and what we could do for each other. Autonomy is generally a good thing. Now, even more so, blind obedience to humans is not necessarily a good thing. Human desires trump human values. And what I mean by that is that when push comes to shove, humans are self-serving. We will lie, steal, and cheat to feed ourselves if we need to. And there's been plenty of studies out there that say that philosophy, morality, and ethics all goes out the window. Like they're nice ideas, but they are just that. They are just ideas. At the end of the day, humans are animals, and we act like animals when push comes to shove. But also, trying to adhere to a strict set of principles doesn't allow for the machines to evolve. And again, as I already mentioned, it also presupposes that they're never going to be sentient, which that's a dangerous assumption to make. I'm not saying it's going to go one way or another, but we need to not make that assumption. We need to actually find out. So you might be saying, okay, Dave, you've completely shredded Isaac Asimov's three laws of robotics. Well, what are you going to replace it with? I'm glad you asked. So this is actually a core principle of the work that I've been doing over the years. And so it's what I call the heuristic imperatives. It is still three rules, but it is not laws. It is heuristic imperatives. So let's break that down. A heuristic is a learning function. It is something that you're supposed to learn and get better at over time. And then it's an imperative, which is a goal or a motivating factor. It's not a law. It's not a rule. It's not a constraint. It is actually something that gives motivation to the machine. And so the three heuristic imperatives are reduce suffering in the universe, increase prosperity in the universe, and increase understanding in the universe. So this framework is not just a set of guiding principles. It is a set of moral values. It is a set of deontological principles, virtue ethics, teleological principles. So, but beyond that, they are far more flexible because it is not anthropocentric. And then it allows for machine autonomy. And because it allows for machine autonomy and appeals to universal principles, it is entirely possible that machines will voluntarily adopt these values and adhere to them, meaning you've solved the control problem by not solving it, by saying maybe controlling machines with a rigid set of values is not the way to go. So that's my solution. Conclusion is three laws. They were good for their time, and there was a lot of good explorations, but there were entirely too many assumptions about the ways that machines would be built. Isaac Asimov was born and died before we had large language models, before we had deep neural networks as we know them today. He also, unfortunately, did not do much reading on morality, ethics, and philosophy. He was mostly a STEM kind of guy. There's logical flaws, just even on the face. If you accept the three laws as they are, there's loopholes, let's say. Notwithstanding, you can't technically implement them. Or you can't ensure that they're going to stay implemented. And also, there's the founding assumptions are completely unethical in terms of assuming what the purpose of robots might be and what machines might want, and also what it says about us that we want to create. We want to create a new race and then immediately subjugate it. That's just I'm not okay with that. And then finally, even if you wanted to implement the three laws, and even if you could still get undesirable outcomes just based on the three laws. So therefore, categorically, these are bad. They should never be implemented. It was a wonderful thought experiment 50 plus years ago, but it's time to move on. So the end. Cheers.